Conspiracy theory is essentially just your history 6 months early, right? It's like the track record is off the charts.
Oncologists who are saying that they're getting better results from this 60-cent pill for things like breast cancer than they get from the standard of treatment. You should start questioning every narrative. So what else is being suppressed and lied about?
The idea of the scientific method, which is that you rigorously test a theory, is just totally out the window with this because you give them legal liability protections and you reduce the requirements.
Anywhere where there's like high competition and high intelligence, you're going to have a level of arrogance where people don't want to be questioned. We have more scientific knowledge, but that doesn't mean that the scientific knowledge we have now isn't going to be laughed at in 100 years.
There's so much more value in like a mother's intuition than in what a doctor would tell us.
Good morning, good afternoon where I am, good morning where you are, man. How's it going?
Yeah, what's going on? Good afternoon. We're back. It's been almost a month since we recorded, and quite a lot has happened over the last couple months. So yeah, what's new?
Well, I did all my stuff airline wise, training and checked out, and 737 checkout. So I'm now a line pilot there for a little while. Hopefully that doesn't last too long, because this is where I think we belong, and it's really touching that point where I may give up the dream job there, but hopefully soon, hopefully 2025. We'll see how that all goes. But yeah, that's what kind of kept me away. I was super busy there for about a month and a half, and then as soon as that ended, you turned around and went on vacation. So we recording was scarce. How was your trip?
Yeah, it was great. I had back-to-back work events, one with you in Phoenix. We went to the Factum Financial Business Owners Group, which was just awesome. I texted my wife that it's like I'm totally in my element. It was great to just be at a bar, having a drink, talking about life insurance, and everyone's super into life insurance. Typically, I'm the only one, and my wife is happy that I'm interested in this, and that I find it so enjoyable. But she has a very reasonable tolerance for life insurance talk, which is for most people almost none. And so it was cool to be able to just find people that like to nerd out on this stuff, and spare her my continuous talking about insurance.
Yeah, I get the same thing. And with that trip too, the other cool thing, like the folks at Factum are awesome. They have a podcast that they put on pause for a while for if our listeners are interested, called Beat the Banks. But it's just cool when you get around. It's the same thing when you go to the Nelson Nash Institute think tank, which you'll be going, I think, this year. You couldn't make because of your penalty vectors last year over into Virginia. But it's just awesome. And in fact, they're so like-minded with us. When you get into a group of people that are thinking about a world of abundance, it just changes your perspective completely. And you need to do that from time to time. You need to get in person with those kinds of people. It was absolutely fantastic. So shout out to Kyle Fuller and Wade Borth with Factum Financial and the whole group they put together.
Yeah, it was really fun. And that was my first work event. So my wife was here with the girls, and I haven't been, since my daughter was born, I've effectively been out of the Navy. And so this is the first stretch away from them with both of them. So my wife did an awesome job with both the girls, and everything went smoothly. I know it was pretty chaotic having a 6-month-old and a very energetic toddler, but I'm really appreciative that she was cool with me going on this trip, because I got a lot of value out of it professionally and networking wise. Just great meeting people that are in the industry and passionate about doing it right. And yeah, and then we went on a family vacation that we just got back from a couple days ago. We drove and did a national park trip. So we went to Sequoia National Park, saw the biggest tree in the world, the unfortunately named General Sherman tree. It turns out apparently it's the largest living organism on Earth, and just to see it in person was incredible. My daughter had a little fever the day we left, and then I got a little bit of a fever too, and we were up at altitude all of a sudden. And so that first day, we weren't really hiking because we have 2 young kids, but to see the General Sherman tree was like a half-mile walk, and I was I was definitely feeling the altitude. I think me and both of my daughters were definitely sick for the first couple days, and my wife was totally fine. She's super healthy, so she had no issues with it at all, and I it definitely hit me hard. So, but yeah, we did Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park, which are kind of a joint national park, like combo. So we did that over a couple days, and then we went up to Yosemite and did 5 days there. And the Yosemite Valley is like a 45-minute drive from the gate. So you're in the car a lot if you're not staying in the valley. But that kind of 6 mile loop in the valley itself is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's unbelievable to see all of these very famous rock formations like Half Dome and El Capitan, like on both sides of you in these beautiful forests, huge trees. We saw some bears, which was really cool, and just had a really good time. And then we did a couple days in Paso Robles, which is Southern California wine country, and just sort of chilled for a couple days and then did the drive back. So girls were great in the car, which we were a little bit nervous about, but overall had a really fun time. It was nice to get away. All of the travel that we've done in the last couple of years has either been to see family or like when I was in Virginia, the girls coming out to visit me, and like that's obviously like we tried to do some fun stuff there, but it was always kind of overshadowed by the Navy and that whole situation. And then there's always kind of that like pending separation again where they're about to go back across the country. And so just to be like mentally to be in a place where I'm done with the Navy entirely. I'm past it, not leaving again for this ridiculous Virginia boat job, etc. It was a really, really good trip, and I think we all needed it. So, but glad to be home and yeah, getting back at it.
That's a nice hat.
Yeah. I got this at the Factum event. That's the Factum Financial logo, and there's One America, our preferred carrier, as well as I think Factum's exclusive carrier.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. General Sherman, man. It's funny. I was just watching a documentary about mostly, or a lot of it is about the Civil War. I didn't finish it yet. Started falling asleep just due to pure fatigue from days and days and days of, chasing kids all around. But it was absolutely, it's fascinating. And he was part of a tyrannical regime. And that's one of the things that brought me to where we all ended up was I read a book probably in 2004, I'm guessing, called The Real Lincoln by DiLorenzo. I just lost Thomas DiLorenzo.
Thomas DiLorenzo, yeah.
Yeah, and that book was actually like, I was like hardcore neocon. Love George Bush. Like, let's go to war, and Saddam Hussein's bad, and we're gonna go and kill all these people across the world and fight terrorism there so they don't get us here. Like, I was all on board with all that when I enlisted in the Air Force in 2003. And I read that book in like 2004, and it caused me to question everything because, just like the title says, the real Lincoln. It was the first time I ever realized that everything I learned about Abraham Lincoln was a myth. And at least everything that is taught in mainstream culture. There's probably some things I heard that were real, and you find out that like Sherman was just a straight up murderer. And you find out that Abraham Lincoln was one of the most micromanaging commanders in chief of American history. So he had fired, I can't remember what the number is anymore. I read it so long ago, but he probably fired 9 or 10 lead generals before he got to Grant. Because he was so involved in every operation they did that when they did something he didn't like, he fired them and replaced them immediately. So he was literally running the war from the White House based on the way he thought it should be run, not based on the way the generals thought it should be run. But then, like, the counter to that is they when people bring up the evils that General Sherman did and completely torching villages, killing men, women, children, everybody in his path, Sherman's march, everybody's like, well, he was kind of rogue, and how could Lincoln know what he was doing as he went through those southern states? So on one hand, like, you find out that Lincoln was a total micromanager of his generals, except Sherman. He kind of didn't know what he was doing. He was just letting him run rampant. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you don't have that as a characteristic as a micro. Like, think about the bosses you've ever had, the commanding officers you had who had those micromanaging tendencies. They micromanaged everybody. They didn't just have like one guy they let run loose without knowing. So yeah, so it's funny you said that about it. It is terrible that they named a tree after somebody who just rained tyranny on civilians and murdered people in his path. And I think he said one of his favorite things to do was actually kill. And I'm putting this in quotes. It's not a quote, but I'm going to kind of like semi quote him. But he said one of his favorite hobbies was to kill the Negroes who helped them along the way of Sherman's march. After they had helped, he murdered them. It's like absolutely disgusting when you read his stuff. And we're naming trees after him, but our culture at the same time is toppling Robert E. Lee statues who did none of those things. Crazy world, isn't it?
It really is. And my family roots are in Georgia, and so the General Sherman's always it's always like a, you know, you hear what he did to people there and what his army did. His invading army. I mean, we don't really, we lose that context. And when you read Creature from Jekyll Island, you realize that it was like 2 to 3 years into the war that they started trying, because they were losing, the North was losing, and they were trying to create an emotional appeal, like the same way that we lost Vietnam, right? No American soldiers have any stake in Vietnam. We don't care. Like,
Right.
the same way that Taiwan is gonna fall is because, like, you have to have some kind of moral high ground or some kind of an emotional investment in the fight. And in this fight, one side has a very clear reason for fighting, and if we were to get involved kinetically, we have no real concern. Like, nobody has a connection to Taiwan for the most part, at least like as a collective unit. The military, like, we don't have a reason to be there. Same with Vietnam. And so in the same way, you've got people that are like, why are we invading like a few states away where we have family and stuff? Like, and it was an economic struggle that the war precipitated, or was precipitated by economic sanctions and economic policy that was disadvantaging the South. And so the secession was for economic reasons. And a couple years into the war, they introduced this idea of freeing the slaves, of slavery being like, nobody was fighting for slavery on either side.
No.
And that became a talking point a couple years in, and you can read the documentation of when that was implemented as a strategy, because they needed something to get Northerners excited about, something to fight for, because they had nothing. Because, like, why are we invading our own country? Why are we shredding the Constitution here when these states did per the Constitution what they were allowed to do? And so, anyways, yeah, I don't understand why they would name a tree after General Sherman. He was a despicable monster. And you look at, like, what did we do to a country that had nothing to do with 9/11 on the back of 9/11, where 3,000 people died? Like, we're talking tens and tens of thousands of women and children that were murdered by someone from their own country. And he's like honored in a park. It's kind of a, you know,
It's kind of wild. And one day when we're prepared, because right now we're just talking off the cuff. I don't think the Civil War was, and in our pre-show little discussion, we didn't even bring it up. So kind of, or some call it the War of Northern Aggression. Depends on your perspective and what you've learned, right? But we could probably like outline some thoughts on this and have entire episodes on it. It's fascinating. And one of the things that this documentary talked about, which I had never heard or investigated before, was more a little bit from the spiritual side. So I'm speaking of this from complete, I saw it once, and I want to look some more into it. But originally it was like a puritanical society, both where Jamestown was settled and then ultimately where Plymouth Rock too. And those being the initial settlements, and as that spread, but eventually the kind of Unitarian sect of what they called, in air quotes, Christianity, came into New York and all of those different places. And you kind of started to get like a Unitarian theology in the North versus a more biblical based Puritan Christianity that was mostly Presbyterian based at the time in the South. And so there's a real spiritual aspect to that war too, beyond just the economic side. And there always is. But I had never investigated that. It's fascinating. I don't know if you know anything about it from your perspective, but I've never considered it. It's kind of, I'm looking forward to going down that rabbit hole a little bit here soon.
Yeah, we should. And everyone listening should read The Creature from Jekyll Island. I know we've mentioned it before, and it's kind of like a gateway to understanding how we've been duped financially. And it's kind of, after becoming your own banker, definitely the next book you should read. It's on Audible. It's a really enjoyable read because it's kind of like a storyline within the context of these, like the history of central banking in America in particular. But he goes through these wars, and like there is almost nothing that we're taught about the Civil War that can be backed up with with actual evidence. And but that doesn't really matter because the narrative is so powerful that I don't think that that take is ever going to be accepted. But then again, we are starting to see people come around to things like, you know, just this month, I believe it was the WHO admitted it after 60 years that fluoride is indeed poison. And
All
so
that.
that is a, you know, a very easy to prove quote conspiracy theory. And now conspiracy theory is essentially just, you know, your history 6 months early, right? It's like the track record is off the charts, but that's an easy one because you just look into the marketing process. And we covered it in one of our previous episodes. And Edward Bernays is the father of modern psychological marketing, brags about that in his book. How do we take this aluminum byproduct? Creating aluminum generates a byproduct that was too expensive to safely dispose of, or because of the toxicity. And so sending out these flyers to dentists and saying, hey, we've done some studies that if you use this on your teeth, it'll whiten your teeth. And it was basically, you had to opt out. You had to actually send the reply in to opt out. And so most just threw it away, but that was per the card was basically agreement. And so that's an easy one. That's like JV level quote, not even conspiracy, because I mean, well, it is a conspiracy, but it's not a theory. Like that is now, people have been saying that for so long and you were thought to be crazy. And now I'd say I don't know any people who still really believe that have looked into it. It's kind of like what we're going to talk about with vaccines, where it's like you either just kind of agree and move on and not look into it, or you become highly skeptical with just a little bit of research. And so that one is now essentially proven that indeed the theorists were correct, and fluoride is poison, and it
Yeah.
fogs your brain. It like there's you can go into different levels of what it might do, all the way from like, you know, sealing up your pineal gland, you know, on the like the extreme end of what it does, to just depositing metal into your body and leading to something like Alzheimer's. But there's that it is a bad product for you and harmful to you is no longer a debatable thing. And so as we talk about vaccines, we're not going to talk too much about finance today. We're going to talk about family. We're going to talk about vaccines and how we kind of got down this road. But just remember, if you're super skeptical of that or can't even hear that, just remember that this month, the WHO said after 60 years, you guys were right. Fluoride is a toxic product, and it's been pumped into our water for years and years and years and years. So
Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, everybody knows in recent history that how ivermectin was like called horse paste by the common narrative and the general public. And it was like, I remember Joe Rogan getting made fun of for saying he used ivermectin, and everybody said, "Oh, he took horse paste to get rid of it. He's on the conspiracy stuff and he's nuts." And as it turns out, like now there's oncologists who are saying that they're getting better results from this, you know, 60-cent pill for things like breast cancer than they get from the standard of treatment. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, you know, none of the big institutions are backing that yet. But when doctors are finally saying that, and people were saying that 4 years ago too, that there's potential for that, it doesn't mean it's a cancer treatment. And I don't want that out there. So I'm not a doctor. Don't start taking ivermectin at my word. But the point is, like, these little things trickle out. And if you see that and you recognize, like, why did they step on this medicine that was perfectly safe, that it has like no side effects? Why were they just trying to crush that? You should start questioning every narrative. Like, so what else is being suppressed and lied about? And that's kind of what that book I talked about, The Real Lincoln, it started making me thinking about, if I was lied to about Lincoln, what else am I being lied to? And so, and for me, when my first daughter was born in 2010, it was 2011, because it was like I think her 6-month checkup, the well baby checkups, which I think are silly, where the drug pushers known as pediatricians, yeah, are measuring your baby and trying to give them vaccines. All, you know, I can measure them at home. Yeah, and I remember saying to my wife, like, that's a lot of shots, especially when you think about how they're combination shots. Like DTP was 3, it's not 1, it's 1 injection with 3 different vaccinations or 3 different drugs inside. And so that's really 3 vaccines. And then, there with that one, I think it was 6 months. I'm going back 14 years almost here, 13 years. And then there was more and more and more. And I was like, let's pump the brakes and stop this and think about it and start focusing. Like, let's actually dig into this and start reading some people that are questioning that. What do they have to say? What does the science have to say? And my gosh, that took me down an entire deep rabbit hole that made me question everything ultimately, which is how we met.
Yeah. We were, both being in the military, we just stuck like pincushions and you
Yeah.
don't really think about it. I can't even count. And, every year you have a flight physical and they say, all right, here, you're due up for this, 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 and this. And so part of, you not try to knock it out all in one day so you can get back to flying, roll up your sleeve, and then there's your 4 shots. You don't think about it. But so I understand not caring about it, not questioning the COVID shot, at least in the beginning.
Oh, I do too. Yeah.
And so I came about it by I was in a fortunate situation when COVID happened in that I was doing the grad school program. We were in Massachusetts. I was separated from the Navy essentially, except for admin purposes. I was attached to the Harvard ROTC in it, and that was it. I never went to the building. I never had any contact with them. I never had any pressure. And so I kind of got to watch from a distance while all my peers were heavily pressured and coerced and lied to by the Navy directly. My buddy Dro was supposed to go out to Hawaii for his department head tour, the same one that I ended up not getting to do. And it was like, they're telling him, hey, it's a week before your flight out there. We're going to cancel your flight and cancel your DH tour if you don't take this shot. And he was very resistant until the last minute, did not want to take it. And eventually it was like, I can't, this is ridiculous, but I'm just going to take it because I just need to get out there and I don't want to deal with like trying to figure out these flights and stuff. And so I feel for the guys that had the very intense pressure, or my buddy Dan, where he took the first one because he was on that ship that got stuck in Guam, the Teddy Roosevelt. They weren't getting information. He just took the first shot, went to the hospital because he had had heart surgery previously in his career. And so his cardiologist said, you cannot take the second one under any conditions. And so he didn't. He submitted his medical exemption with the cardiologist's endorsement, and the Navy denied it and said, nope, we got to take the second one. It absolutely unbelievable criminal behavior. And whether in this life or the next, they will answer for that. But I was blessed in that I did not have that pressure. So I watched all this from a distance. And at the same time, my wife was pregnant with our first daughter. And so she's very diligent in health, and even more so over the last couple of years has become very well read in natural products. She screens everything that comes into our house, and we've noticed the difference by cutting out seed oils. Like I used to be a hard, heavy sweater. Like if I'm walking down to the grocery store or whatever, and it's 75 degrees out, I'm pouring sweat. I honestly don't even sweat anymore because we don't have seed oils. Like there's something to it. I don't know if that's actually why, but we've been talking about that. Like something's definitely changed. And so she went really, really diligent in this like search for how do I be as healthy as I can be for my baby. And so my role in that was I looked into the vaccine stuff because we both wanted to learn what's going to happen in the hospital. And I didn't know anything. And so I just looked at everything that's going to happen. And so that got me to looking at the vaccine schedule. And do you know what the CDC childhood vaccine schedule is right now?
I think it's 76 or 72 shots by 18.
It was until COVID. They've added 3. My numbers that I have pulled up here, it was 79 by 18. With COVID, they recommend 3 COVID shots by 18. So now it's 82 is what I'm looking at. I've seen a few different numbers, but it's in the 80s, like the low 80s is what I see across the board here. Plus or minus 1 or 2, I would say, depending on different sources. Cause I think I don't know that everyone's integrated the COVID shots into their requirements because especially now.
Yeah. If you're still getting that, you're an idiot. How do you feel bad saying it? Like there's no way to say it. Like you're literally, you have your head in the sand.
Yeah. And so I looked at, that guy. So I started looking into it, and I took on a moral weight of like, all right, after my wife gives birth, she's going to be exhausted, out of it. It's on me. What's going to happen to my daughter? Everything that goes into her body is going to be on me, on my shoulders. And so I specifically looked into vaccines, and I got a book called The Vaccine Book by Dr. Robert Sears, who
Yep, I read that one.
he's given thousands and thousands of doses, but he takes the approach of, I'm going to give you the pros and the cons, because people that are questioning this are not crazy. There is reason to question it, but there's also validity to these. So I took the 50-50 approach. I went into each one with, if one sways me 51%, I'm going to give her that one, but I'm going to choose each one we're going to give her, because if we give her one and it damages her, which statistically there is a undeniable correlation between some of these products and certain issues that have skyrocketed, specifically correlated to the Vaccine Protection Act in 1986. And so it would be on me if we give her something and she gets injured from it. It would also be on me if we don't give her something and she gets what that vaccine was alleged to protect. And so I bought several books and books on specifically on individual shots. I tried to do as diligent research, and I didn't approach it as a skeptic trying to be swayed. I approached it as an open book. Like, I am going to make the decision here, and I'm not just going to blindly trust authority, because at the same time the COVID stuff was happening, right? And I looked at the European schedule is in the high teens, I believe, maybe 20 in the same time frame, and Japanese was single digits in the same time frame. And then you look at why that is. We're the only country on earth that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV, and we're the only ones that give them financial free pass, no liability for any product labeled a vaccine. And that right there was like the first thing that I was like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense.
1986. That was under Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And so I started looking at that, and none of them passed muster to me when reading takes on both sides. The one that came close, I believe, was pertussis, the whooping cough. And I was like, this seems the cons of this seem very low as far as like potential for damage, and I think the protection would be acceptable. And I asked, that was when you were saying the DPT, like I saw it as Tdap, but it's combined in tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis.
Yeah, you're right. It is Tdap now. It used to be DTP.
Yep. I said, I'm interested. Like, I'm going to make my own decisions. And of course, as soon as you say that, they lose. They're done with you. They're done with you. So these are during these appointments while my wife is pregnant, and I said, hey, I am very hesitant on these two, the T and the D, but I'm interested in the P. Like as I do my research, can we just get the P by itself? And she said, no, they don't make it by itself. You have to get all three. I said, well, why is that? Well, because no one was taking the T and the D. So in order to get people to take the T and the D, we combined it with the P, which people wanted. And so you got to get the combined shot. And I was like, that's, I mean, brilliant from a business, financial strategy, but that's terrible. That's not science. That's not medicine. Yeah. It's not medicine. And so I was like, well, okay, then it's not worth it. Like, it no longer makes my 51% scale. And the final thing that really was the nail in the coffin, and then I'll kind of get off this little spiel, but it was the appointment with the pediatrician where we got the lab results back. The one intervention we did was my wife got the blood draw for Hep B, just to determine if you have it. Hep B is an STD. We went to the appointment. Results were obviously negative. We were told you don't have Hep B, therefore the baby can't have Hep B. And I had my list of ingredients and my write-up on Hep B, all the notes I had taken. Hey, can you look at this? Like, I'm skeptical to give this list of ingredients, which include, like monkey kidney cells and formaldehyde and aluminum and, aborted fetal tissue from a white Caucasian male from 2 to 6 weeks old, like a preposterous ingredient list. I was like, you just told us that my wife doesn't have Hep B and therefore the baby can't have Hep B. But I'm reading like what happens. And within 6 hours of birth, you take her from us and give her a Hep B vaccine. It doesn't make sense. Can you explain that? And she said, well, they don't need it when they're born. But when they become sexually active in their early teens, they need the 15-year booster. And we find that fewer parents fall through the cracks if we get them all on day 1 or day 0. And I was like, okay, I'm done with all of it. I'm done with you. Like, I'm done with the system. I don't ever need to see a pediatrician again. That is a very telling answer, because there is no science to that answer at all. And we're told to trust the science. I said, no, that's absolutely, we're going to skip that one. And they get really angry because hospitals get compensated by their vaccine administration. But that answer was totally unacceptable, but that was a straight faced answer. And I kind of was waiting for the punchline of like, I'm just kidding. No, that was the legitimate answer. And I found that you can't get beyond a surface level. Like, I would bring the vaccine inserts, what's actually in the vial that they had to put on the website, and with all of these warnings and risks and stuff. And I was like, what do you think about these? They didn't read it. They don't know.
They don't know. So I would say that if we have any young parents listening who maybe, thinking about having babies who or pregnant or already have young children or children at all, or, if I don't care if you're a grandparent, if you can influence this, there's one very simple thing you should do. Even if you don't want to go down the study list that both of us did at different times in our lives, you should when the pediatrician or the hospital recommends getting this shot and they want to give it to you, you should ask for the vaccine insert. And if you can read it, their response will be very telling. Either one, sometimes, and I'd be willing to, you're going to have a 50-50 shot of the nurse administering the vaccine, even knowing what the vaccine insert is. Number 2, they probably won't have it available. And if they do, they're going to leave the room for an extended period of time. And I don't understand why. Like, just go get the piece of paper. And if you haven't seen that, if you've ever taken out like a bottle of Tylenol and you kind of slip that, it's in that plastic sleeve on the outside of the package or on the outside of the bottle, and you open that up, it opens up like an aviation map. It's folded as many times as they can fold it and still fit it in there. And it's going to list all the ingredients. So if you can get them to give that to you, ask them what their favorite ingredient is. Go to the ingredients list and then figure out your favorite ingredients too, if you can pronounce them. You'll have Google right on your phone and look up the top 5 ingredients and see what they are. And then look at your baby and determine if you'd be willing to pour that ingredient in their mouth directly if it wasn't part of a shot. And ask the doctors too what they're just literally, you don't even have to do all the research. You can do all that in 10 minutes in a doctor's office. And if that doesn't set the alarm bells off for you, I guess proceed with the narrative. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. And when you read about, I asked a pediatrician this, and they won't answer questions. Like, they will just, but I asked about what I had read, which was that, I believe it was in the vaccine book, but I'm not positive on that. I've read so much at the time, that if they drop a vial of the vaccine and it breaks, they have to evacuate the room for toxic exposure directly into your bloodstream. One more thing on that just to kind of like, hopefully, and again, we're not doctors, which honestly means we're not paid to give vaccines. And there's probably a lot of medical professionals furious, if any are listening. But one thing that should pique your interest when you start learning the history of this and of this category of product, you can read the history of each one, and they generally correspond to, there's tons and tons that were put out there, and many of them didn't make it to market, even though they have these protections. And that's because they can't really tie in the narrative that we fixed XYZ, even though those things were on the decline with modern plumbing and sanitation and like just washing your hands, like a lot of the things that are prevented against, getting rid of DDT being sprayed, all over the country. Once that got banned, the rates of a lot of these illnesses went down drastically. And so you come on the back end and you put a product to market and say that we fixed XYZ. There's a lot of history like that. Now, again, don't take my word for it, do your own research, but part of the Vaccine Injury Protection Act that gave them this liability was that if you label a product vaccine, you minimize the testing requirements. Now, here's the big kicker for me. There's never been a double-blind safety test on a vaccine product where you have a control group and a test group, and you compare the results without knowing who is in which group. And then you later find out, are there trends in one way or the other? The reason is because if you label the vaccine, you get away with, you get around a lot of testing requirements. But the big one was that they said, because it would be unethical to not give a group of children this vaccine against this deadly disease, we will not have a control group. We're going to give 100% of the kids in our test group the vaccine, and then we're going to compare results. And when they do future developments of these products, they're going to compare it to the previous testing group. So there was never a group, because they thought, how could we choose which children to not give this new miracle product to and have some not get it, right? So knowing that, these safety results are based on comparing new iterations of the vaccine to previously untested by that standard products. And so you start from a flawed premise, and the idea of the scientific method, which is that you rigorously test a theory, was just totally out the window with this, because you give them legal liability protections and you reduce the requirements. And so that's something to think about when you hear, and now, I mean, look at the companies that make these. If you trust Pfizer with this, all right, boost away. But corporate, it's not just that, we talk about the government, we talk about, the IRS a lot. We talk about, congressional acts, and we talk taxes, we talk all this stuff about the government, but corporations are ruthless as well. And I want to give one example real quick, going back to Confederate generals, talking about Coca-Cola real quick. Very briefly, just a few things about Coca-Cola. Founded by a Confederate general who was using a wine and cocaine mixture as a remedy. And then when they couldn't market it with wine in it, they put sugar in it to make the cocaine more palatable. Eventually became Coca-Cola, and Asa Candler bought the company out from General Pemberton, who was the original founder of this. That's all fine. I don't care that it's the issue is not that it originally had cocaine in it. Even, we all know that, we kind of joke about it, but whatever. I don't care about that. But what's interesting to know is the aggressiveness of the marketing. For instance, Coca-Cola sponsored and advertised in Hitler Youth propaganda, Third Reich propaganda. In Germany, they didn't like the American appeal, and so they went anti-American during World War II with the Coca-Cola products there. And they in fact created Fanta as a spin-off using concentration camp labor. The history of Fanta, you read that and you're like, wait a second. Everything these companies say about, values, et cetera, it's they use concentration camp labor to create a product separately branded from Coca-Cola, even though it was a Coke product. And that was Fanta. That was the German Coca-Cola, to make it more palatable to the German people. They send it to low income school districts and pump it into, schools don't want to lose the funding that they get from Coca-Cola. So these kids are growing up on Coke. And so just the corporate, the story, I can't remember the name of the podcast, but going into the history of these companies, allegedly there are Pepsi and Coca-Cola wars in the jungles of South America where Union leaders get killed. They have alleged death squads. Pepsi has a submarine. You look into the history of these companies and their expansion, and I'm not trying to shit on these companies specifically, just to say that we're so focused from our fight and our perspective on the government and the federal overreach, but corporations do the same thing. And so if you want to look into the history of a company, I would imagine that a company like Pfizer, you could find a lot of really fascinating stuff along the same lines as with Coca-Cola, all these companies that have a long history and are dominant in their spaces now. And so just really, we're not going to say anything about whether or not you should give your child any product. That's totally your decision. But in the same way that people jump into a 401k without doing any research, and they're just told, this is the way to do your finances, this is the way to plan for retirement. That's the same way that people approach medicine, which is just, they said to take these products. And so we don't say don't do a 401k. We say look into it, understand what you're getting, and put the same level of effort that you're putting into whole life trying to learn IBC, put that towards your 401k and see if it still passes muster. Put that towards vaccines or any other medical products and see if it passes muster.
Put that towards public education and see what you think. Put that towards what your church is telling you, or what the institutions there are telling you. Put that towards everything. Put that towards the food that you ingest and what they call health food. We're just recommending being skeptical, or even maybe not even so much skeptical, but being willing to question what the mainstream narrative is on everything. And I think we both arrived at that in a very similar, not quite parallel, but overlapping ways through our individual histories before we met, which is pretty cool. But going back real quick to medicine, have you ever heard of? I'm not gonna. I brought his name up so I could try to pronounce it. It's Ignaz Semmelweis. Semmelweis is how we would probably say it here in America.
I've not.
He was a doctor in the 1800s, and what he noticed is, and I bring this back to mention the arrogance that falls in any field. Like, think about what we did. We were aviation. Like, you are surrounded by arrogant people, right? You go into the medical community, anywhere where there's like high competition and high intelligence, you're going to have a level of arrogance where people don't want to be questioned. And I'm okay with that to a certain degree, but as long as that doesn't become a brick wall of don't question the experts, which is what we're always told not to do, right? Like the experts say, like, how many scientific journals have you read? Like, yeah, there's a little bit of common sense here. And check this one out, that in hindsight, when we look through the rose colored glasses of current knowledge back to 1800s, like, we would laugh at this because it feels like common sense today. But here was a doctor, like I said, somewhere in the 1800s, and I'm going to look him up, and I'll spell it since I brought his name up here. His name it's spelled Ignaz. His last name, Semmelweis, is Semmelweis. So look up his story for yourself. It's fascinating. But basically what happened was he noticed two, let's call them maternity clinics in the modern world. One had a really high postpartum mortality rate for the mothers. The other one had a really low one. And he was looking at the discrepancies of why. Couldn't figure it out. One of them they were mostly delivered by medical professionals of the day. The other one was all midwives. Well, throughout his career, one of his friends got sick with a fever that like almost perfectly emulated what the mothers were going through. And that was happening, through the reproductive tract following, is kind of where the infection started, following childbirth. And what he realized was that his friend was accidentally nicked with the scalpel that was being used on a cadaver, or for autopsies. So that dirty scalpel caused an infection that gave him the same fever he recovered from it that was killing these women. So what he started looking at was the hands, because these people were handling, probably without gloves and without all the cleaning and hand washing we do now, they were handling cadavers to do the autopsies, and the same doctors and the same medical students were also giving birth to these babies. So they were transferring, this decrepit cells from the dead to the mothers, touching their birth canal, passing an infection, and they had like a 10% mortality rate of mothers. Like, supposedly, in part of the story, women were giving birth in the streets at a lower death rate because they were scared to death to go to the clinics because they had a 1 in 10 chance of dying. Right. So what were the midwives at the other birthing clinic didn't deal with cadavers. They weren't doctors. Well, so in the hospital, what he presented there was like, okay, so we're carrying filth from the autopsy room to the birthing room. And he required everybody in his hospital to simply do one thing: wash their hands with just water. He wasn't even using soap, as I remember the story. And the birth and the postpartum mortality went down to like the same level as what the midwives had, literally by just washing the hands. Well, his hospital became the safest place to deliver a baby where he worked. The medical community, in their arrogance, because they can't be causing the infection, we're the doctors. We're not doing this to anybody. We know better. We go to medical school. We study nutrition in the modern day. We study vaccines in the modern world. It's the same sort of thing. But at the time, they said, well, we're the doctors. We're the ones studying medicine. There's no chance that we're making these people sick. They ended up removing his medical license. They put him in a mental institution where he had a nervous breakdown. And in the story, he ends up getting not the story, what really happened, he ended up getting beat by the guards at one point after having a nervous breakdown and developed, I think, like a gangrene infection that killed him as a young man. I mean, he was probably, I don't know how old he was. He was probably in his 40s or something like that. All because he questioned the science with what we now consider common sense. Well, history is just a reflection of what's, or the current day is just a reflection of things that have happened in history. We have more scientific knowledge, but that doesn't mean that the scientific knowledge we have now isn't going to be laughed at in 100 years just because the people at the top, the arrogant ones, the ones making money on it, et cetera, they can be just as wrong now as they were in his day. So just consider that. Like these were the smartest people in the world at the time, the doctors. Doctors, if you go back to the big professions of the 1800s and those years, it was mostly doctors, lawyers, and clergy is where your most intelligent people landed. So these are your most intelligent people in the world who couldn't handle being told to wash their hands because they're making women sick. We laugh at that now. Think about that. It's important to realize, like, from the lens of history, where he stood. He was so counter narrative that they killed him, more or less.
Yeah, and you have the capability to become, like, you should be the expert in your family. Now, again, we speak mostly to fathers here. That's our primary audience, I think. But like you should be the experts, not trusting the experts. I mean, take their research if there's actual scientific method applied. But you ultimately have the authority. We always talk about stopping a passenger. Like for me, I am in control of our financial journey. I'm at the controls. I'm in the cockpit. I am not blindly trusting anyone, and I'm doing all of my research on the natural products, the health, the wellness of our daughters, that side of it. My wife is the expert. Like, I trust my wife more than I trust a pediatrician because she has put in so many hours into learning about this stuff and learning about birth and learning about the hospital system. And if she's like, hey, we need to do XYZ regarding our daughters, regarding, health, in general, like I fully, like, I almost blindly trust her now because she's proven that she has done the research, and intuitively there's so much more value in like a mother's intuition than in what a doctor would tell us. And so we don't really use the medical system. We do have a naturopath on the island that my wife takes our daughters to, but neither of them have had shots. They were both born naturally. We did a home birth for the second one. We're never going back to a hospital unless there's like a complication that we really need to, because I think that's how it's supposed to happen. And I now have proof of concept, and I have enough, like, over and over seeing that what my wife's intuition was regarding our daughters has been right every time. So now I do almost blindly trust her as the expert in those kind of things because she is so dialed into that relationship and is putting in the effort and is reading. And so I don't trust people I don't know inherently, if they're just telling me to do something, because I think that we all need to take back the authority that we have as parents, like, again, fathers for most of our audience, but for any mothers listening, like, it's really cool I think that COVID woke so many people up because it was such a bastardization of the scientific method and just so antithetical to doing good research, doing, like, the idea of trusting the experts now, to me, is like, it's such a joke that you can't even say it with a straight face. Trust the science, trust the experts. Like, they've lost all credibility and permanently for me. But the new expert in my life, as far as a lot of, like, child, like, all of that stuff, like, my wife has done the research and she's proven that like, that is the source that we're going to go with. In the same way, I'm taking that on as far as the financial strategy, our overall, like, kind of big picture, long-term planning. Like, I trust myself, but I think we want all of our clients to not be relying on us for financial advice. I mean, we will give our perspective. We are doing, our podcast, our content blog, all this stuff. Like, we're trying to put information out there so that our clients can become the experts, not just listen to us. And those decisions, whether financial or medical, health, etc. That should all be like this. You don't need an expert to tell you what to do, and you need to get to the point where you trust yourself and your ability to think critically in these decisions for your family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And to boot, the one thing I think you missed there is the reason for all that is nobody's going to love your children like your mother or their mother. So your doctor definitely doesn't. The daycare definitely doesn't love your kids. Everybody knows that. Like a mother's always going to be superior in the way that they treat the children, and a father for that matter. But yeah, that's really what it comes down to is trusting yourself. And I mean, another reason I don't, I do want to say when it comes to medical care and when it comes to doctors and everybody else, I am a huge fan. I would not want to be anywhere else than the American medical system for trauma or for acute care that I can't do anything about. But we've all been to the doctor and they take your blood pressure and if it's high, which fortunately I've never had high blood pressure or anything, but for people to do, they immediately want to put them on a medication. How many times have they asked you, like, what stress are you under? What's your background? Do you have a prayer life? What do you eat? Do you exercise? Like they don't know anything about your life. They try to push you in and out in 15 minutes and give you medicine. So if that doesn't give you pause, right then and there, that's how I know that I don't trust them because they know nothing about my lifestyle. Do you have mold in your basement? Maybe that's what's causing you to be sick. You know what I mean? They just want to give you medicine. It's crazy.
I think Chinese, I don't know if it's a Chinese proverb or maybe just like Chinese medicine quote or something, but basically like if you go to the doctor and the first question they ask isn't what is your diet, they're not like they're not starting in the right place.
They're not worried about your health.
Yeah. Actually, one more thing on this idea, something my wife told me recently that she learned was about school and attendance, because I've mentioned before, we're planning to homeschool, small school, some kind of like very dedicated. If someone else is teaching our children, it's someone that we know and we vet and we trust, and in a very small group. And, we're not going to do the school system. And so one thing that she learned recently, remember about school attendance and how it was always this like huge thing where I'm going to get it wrong. And I would love if she wanted to come on the podcast to discuss a lot of this stuff because she's very well read on it. But it was someone who, no, we were in Paso Robles. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but we were at a winery doing a wine tasting, and it was pretty quiet. So the lady who was doing the tasting sat down with us, and she told us that she got a call from the school saying they were going to potentially report her to Child Protective Service because her son had missed more than the allotted absence days. And she was like, I think she pulled him out of school at that point because she's just how dare you? Like, you don't get to say that, and that tied into, like, my wife and I were talking about that, and later she said something that she learned about the reporting system and how schools are part of their funding is based on attendance. And so you think back to when you were a kid and you think about, your parents get a call because you weren't in school or whatever. It's not necessary. I mean, again, you were a teacher. This is not, teachers might not be tracking this, and teachers.
I don't even know this. I didn't know this.
I mean, teachers, I'm sure most of them have like benevolent means in when they are, wanting kids in class. Like, I'm not saying that the teacher's doing this, but the pressure that's put on the administration of the school from the district, like funding is partially in some capacity based on attendance. And I would have to ask my wife for more details on that, but that's just something else where we're just like, of course it is, the same as, they got paid to call a death a COVID death, and they got paid by the COVID shot that they administered. And so all these things, it's like at every turn, if you just trust what's happening, you're going to get what we have currently. You walk around a high school today, you walk around a hospital today, you go into the VA today, that is the outcome of our education system. People are not thinking critically, and they're just letting it all happen. They're all just passengers in a ride driven by the federal government and pharmaceutical companies. And if you let that's that plane you're going to get on, where it takes you is where it takes you. And, we just want everyone to just start thinking critically here. Like, you have the ability to think through this and make your own decisions. Please do it.
Do it. On the school side, I'm going to recommend another book here. It's Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. He was a award-winning teacher in New York State somewhere, I think upstate somewhere. That book, I read that book while I was still a teacher, maybe not coincidentally within a year of me no longer teaching. It's amazing. And the school system, like everything else that is government funded, is corrupt to the core. So jump into that. That'll be another fun rabbit hole that we don't have time to jump into, but I want to recommend that book to anybody who is interested in learning a little bit more about what's going on in compulsory schooling in America.
And if you're listening and you are very well read on any of these specific, topics, we have a guy in our group that we met in who is, him and his wife are experts in homeopathy. And basically now, if I have my daughter has, whatever kind of cold or anything, and I just message Russell and ask, hey, what do you do about XYZ? And he says, let me ask my wife. He gets back to us with the homeopathic remedy and can talk in detail about what it is. And so we have a network now that we've grown where we have subject matter experts in a lot of these things. And if any of y'all happen to be listening, want to come on and talk about homeopathics, raw milk, the birth process, just the hospital, the that whole system, I think though these would all be really interesting interviews because again, we don't want to just be talking about IBC all the time. We want to bring in these kind of discussions because everyone who's working with us about IBC is also dealing with everyone. We're all dealing with these issues as well. And so, I think that, kind of open invite, if you're well read on these topics, it would be great to just have a listener on to talk through this and just not even like a formal interview, like just chatting like we are, because like you said, everything we're saying, I just want to keep talking about this.
Most of this conversation wasn't even planned. Like we never discussed talking about the doctor. We didn't just, we said, hey, let's talk a little bit about, like we keep seeing vaccine questions pop up again. And that was the extent of this. So this was just a free flowing conversation for the most part. So yeah, I'm absolutely like, come on and do that because these are pretty interesting. And the second half of what this episode was going to be, we were going to talk about family and we were always talking when it comes to IBC and it becomes about, leaving a legacy generationally for your family. And oftentimes we talk about that in the financial realm, but probably even more important, and the thing we never talk up is how do I leave a legacy, a generational legacy to my children, grandchildren, et cetera, from the family value side, from the roots side, from making sure that they're somebody that's impacted in a way that they're going to bring value to the world, that they're going to spread Christianity for us, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something I've been diving into and learning and trying to get better at. So that we're going to save that for another episode because I think we're about an hour in. But yeah, it's going to be an awesome discussion. So I look forward to that one. I think we'll do maybe a couple money ones here in between, IBC specific, and then come back to that. And man, it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one because if you think about what we're doing with IBC is we are putting the financial legacy, the future of abundance in place for our families. Most people that are doing IBC, if both parents were to pass suddenly, the children would be inheriting many, many multiple of our current net worth. Like my daughters will be multi-millionaires one day. That's a given based on what we are doing now and the seeds that we're planting right now. Whether I die tomorrow or in 60 years, my daughters will be, if I die in 60 years, they will be many, 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 many times more millionaires. But that's one part of it. That's where we specialize is helping you create that estate and that legacy. But then, you don't want to just dump a pile of money on them without instilling these values. And so the next conversation is going to be about how, just kind of talking through, and both of us, your oldest is 13, right? Yep. My oldest is 3.5. So, Brian's a decade further down the road than I am, but neither of us are at the point where, where we're, on the verge of being grandparents or anything like that. But all those things we talk about, once that financial piece is in place, you need to build out the rest of it. And we want to have a more in-depth conversation about how to leave them better off, so they don't have the typical story of inheriting a ton of money and then just blowing it. Like we're going to put all these safeguards in place and build that foundation now beyond just the financial side.
Yeah, we want to build families of impact is
Yep.
really what it means. And it's easy because we both are interested in finance and economics to make that kind of your focus. But I would say that creating wealth is the least important part of that, because wealth in the hands of somebody who doesn't impact the world is, what good is it? So they can live a life of luxury. That's cool. But I actually think the family side might be more important.
Yeah, I'd rather have daughters who have values instilled in them. They're good people, and they don't get much left over, than if the only other option was to leave them $10 million and they're just train wrecks. Like you're
Yeah.
right, that the order of operations here is important. We spend so much time focusing on the financial side inherent to what we do, that is like our clients are all already set up with that piece of it. So we want to bring the other piece of it and talk through it.
And we'll do that soon. Looking forward to it, man. Yeah. All right, brother. Good chat.
Yeah, talk again.